Hello, angels. Welcome back, Music Corner. As always, host Lavender, and it is time for part 2 in a series of videos I'm doing recapping the 2020s so far. We are 5 years deep into the decade, basically 4.5, whatever, but approaching halfway through it. And by the end of the year, I want to talk about my favorite albums of the entire decade so far. But to get there requires listening and re-listening through quite a lot of material. In the first episode of this series, I spoke about my favorite rap records of the decade so far, 15 of them, and now for episode 2, we're going to shift our focus and check out pop music. From some of the biggest albums of the decade in the top 40 and radio pop sphere to some critical darlings of underground and overseas pop music, and even a few indie beloved deep cuts, these are my favorite pop records of the decade so far. 15 of them. We've got 5 honorable mentions to go through, and we're going to start them off with 2 absolutely massive hit albums. On the first one, Bruno Mars and Anderson .Paak come together as Silk Sonic for a brief but incredibly smooth collection of tracks. And in the second slot, Dua Lipa impresses with the slick, retro, 80s-inspired synth pop of her album Future Nostalgia. Another honorable mention, one of the most acclaimed albums of 2024 thus far, Cindy Lee with Diamond Jubilee, an embrace of lo-fi, vintage 60s bubblegum girl group and psychedelic pop that sounds extremely unique and is long but very consistent and very good. Next up, we've got the 1975 with Being Funny in a Foreign Language, whose Jack Antonoff production admittedly can be a little dry at some times, but the songwriting is good, the hooks soar really high. This is still quite a solid effort from the 1975. And the final honorable mention, dipping our toes into the sort of hyperpop adjacent world with a Caroline Polachek's much improved sophomore album, Desire, I Want to Turn Into You. And that's it. Honorable mentions, easy peasy, out the way. Here are my 10 favorite, in order, pop records of the decade so far, as of today. There are going to be a handful of what I'll call underrated favorites on this record, and boy, we're definitely starting off with one, the Slater record, Troubled Paradise. Even the kinds of people you'd expect to really like this record don't seem to like it as much as I do, but man, just going back and listening to this thing this week, this album still hits all of the same buttons that it did when I reviewed it back in 2020. It is just versatile, impressively so, and almost everything that Slater tries on this record, she hits it out of the park. The production is great on the hardest hitting moments, tracks like the hilarious single Cowboys, the unflinching Self-Destruct, but even elsewhere, deep cuts on this record like Serial Killer and Clouds through its various remixes have grown on me since I already gave this album a positive review. It's interesting that I've never really been as in love with anything else that Slater has done in her career, but man, this album, book it start to finish almost, save for a few cringe lyrics on Throatzilla, just really clicks with me, and I like it a lot. And at number 9, you knew she would be here. I have dished out a lot of love to her in her brief career thus far. Olivia Rodrigo with Guts.
I'm right here with all my friends, but you're sending me your new address, and I know we're done, I know we're through, but God, when I look at you.
Olivia had already impressed me on her breakthrough debut album, Sour, back in 2021, and I was pretty excited about a follow-up, especially after hearing singles like Vampire, Get 'Em Back, and the absolutely phenomenal Bad Idea Right. And yeah, Olivia didn't disappoint. This is an improvement on every level. The most emotional moments of Sour are mirrored in beautiful songs like Pretty Isn't Pretty. The hardest hitting and best moments of her punky edge on a track like Brutal is reimagined and even improved upon in a track like Bad Idea Right. This is just an excellent sophomore record, a step up in every way, in maturity, in songwriting, in versatility, in intensity, intimacy, vulnerability. This is just a delightful record that makes me excited for what Olivia Rodrigo is going to do next, because very few pop stars get off to this caliber of start to their career. At number 8, another expected appearance from the mainstream, Beyonce, of course, with Renaissance.
Drop it like a thotty, drop it like a thotty. Bad girl acting naughty, church girl, don't hurt nobody.
While yes, this album is partially an embrace of house music on tracks like its smash hit lead single Break My Soul, it's still a Beyonce record. I'm still classifying it as a pop record because there are just so many pop hooks. It's no wonder that a song like Cuff It became such a big hit. It's infectious. And that's the thing with this album. It shows off Beyonce's ability to still be sonically grounded, to still write those irresistible pop tracks like Break My Soul and Cuff It, but to also turn around and become a sort of badass super cyborg dance floor commanding enviable goddess of house music on a song like Alien Superstar, or even get into her bag and get intense politically righteous on America Has a Problem. Not to mention the ass-shaking anthem of the decade, Church Girl. This thing is long, but God, it's just highlights from start to finish. And while, yeah, I kind of like Cowboy Carter too, to me, Renaissance is one of the best things Beyonce has ever done, and the album has stayed in my rotation. And even the songs that hadn't, going back to them to re-listen for this video, this album is familiar. You hear these songs around a lot, and there's a reason. This thing is just irresistible. It's Beyonce at her peak pop powers, and yeah, I think it's great. At number 7, I'm gonna cheat. I didn't want to do this, and I swear to God, by the end of the year, I'll have made a decision, but I have to split the difference here and just include 2 Charli XCX records, How I'm Feeling Now and Brat.
I like everything about you. Back to you. I don't wanna fall right back to us.
Yeah, both these records are fucking great, and they're great in different ways. It seems like How I'm Feeling Now is the more consistent bunch. It's the more experimental of the two, brashly produced songs like Dylan Brady's work on Claws, the pummeling intensity of some of its hardest hitting tracks, but still the beautiful pop sentimentalities it expresses elsewhere. And you can say a lot of that same stuff about Brad. But in addition, it is also the most emotional record that Charli has ever released. Songs where she is musing on her complicated relationship with Sophie, discussing the pros and cons of potentially having a child. There is just a lot more to chew on in Brat than there had ever been on a Charli record before. One of these days it'll finally click with me which of these records I actually like more, but they're 2 of Charli's greatest accomplishments and 2 of the best pop albums of the decade. I'm limiting it to 1 per artist for reasons that will become clear later, but man, these 2 would easily both make the cut. Gun to my head right now, August 10th, 2024, around 3 p.m. Maybe I guess How I'm Feeling Now, like slightly better. No, I can't. At number 6, a grand, immaculate, illustriously produced and arranged and incredibly dynamic pop album from Perfume Genius with Set My Heart on Fire Immediately.
I run my mouth, I pray and wait. I cross out his name on the page.
This record once again shows off the combination of Mike Hadrius and Blake Mills near their absolute peak, from the dynamically lush orchestral arrangements of a song like the 80s channeling On the Floor to some of the quietest, softest, and most intimate moments on this record. It is astonishingly consistent given just how much land and how much ground they are able to cover sonically. Mike's writing is both intimate and vulnerable in ways that are touching, but also occasionally quite harrowing, raw, but it's deeply engaging no matter how he is presenting himself throughout this record. And yeah, it's just yet another outing in a line of spectacular material that reaches back to their previous record together, Mike and Blake, on the extremely incredible No Shape, and also the very good Ugly Season that followed it. Perfume Genius is just on a truly remarkable series of releases right now. Number 5. Wow, a record that truly, and I say this a lot, but I truly and honestly mean, does not get the credit that it deserves. The Drums with Johnny.
So next time I see you, I'll throw my arms around you on the street corner.
This album had already blown me away before I even heard it, because it seemed like week after week after week we were getting new drum singles, and they were all just astonishing, stellar, incredible hooks, shimmering, sunny choruses, jangly, emotional indie pop instrumentation to boot, and the results were just flawless over and over and over again. Back in 2019, I noted when the drums released Brutalism that this sun-kissed, hyper-blissful, almost surreal, textured indie pop was something that is often replicated but very rarely done well, and nobody does it better than the drums. And Johnny is just in his bag throughout this record. It's amazing how many good songs are on this record, and he does it without needing the most versatile sound palette in the world, save for a moment or two on this record and a strange collaboration with Rico Nasty that somehow also really works. For the most part, you're getting the exact kind of sunny indie pop vibes that you're anticipating going into a drums record, and yet it is just so good over and over and over again. A testament to songwriting and an eye for instrumental detail and subtlety that makes all of these songs so ridiculously infectious. It's insane that an album can have this many tracks, and they're all stuck in my head at the same time. At number 4, the girl who made my favorite pop album of the last decade returns once again with another hit, Lana Del Rey. Did you know there's a tunnel under Ocean Boulevard?
Jimmy, Jimmy, Cocoa, Jimmy, Jimmy, right. Jimmy, Jimmy, Cocoa, Jimmy, give me right.
Like Charlie, I think you can kind of slide an honorable mention here for her previous record, Chemtrails Over the Country Club, which I also like, and I think I could make an argument that it is a tighter and more consistent record. It certainly doesn't have a Bleachers feature, but the highs that Lana manages to reach on Ocean Boulevard are higher than I really even could have anticipated going into the record. I mean, genuinely, it's like I say this every time she drops a new album, but A&W might be the best song she's ever written. And that sentiment runs throughout here. There are just a ton of great tracks. Some of the highlights with collaborators like Jon Batiste and Father John Misty, and deep cuts, singles, just highlight after highlight after highlight. Beautiful, ornate music from Lana Del Rey, but that does not sacrifice her personality. This is still so obviously a Lana Del Rey record with so many songs, be it Peppers or Fishtail or Grandfather, that just only Lana could make, and they are so delightful. The luster and the majesty of her image and her artistry has not faded a bit. If anything, it's brighter than it ever was before, and this record is proof. What a delight. At number 3, an album that came out just 4 years ago, and yet the astonishing lack of any even decent material from this artist that followed has just made it seem so dated. It really feels like a 2010s record, but I can assure you that this masterpiece was actually released in 2020. And I'm talking about Rina Sawayama with Sawayama.
Give me just a little bit. Oh me, oh my. Give me just a little bit.
Yeah, remember this thing? Highly anticipated debut following her beloved Rina EP. I absolutely ate up single after single from this record. I gave it an utterly glowing review. Clarence Clarity's production was amazing. Excess was my single of the year, and I stand by every goddamn bit of it. This album is fucking killer. It is all killer, no filler. Rina Sawayama's intensity is almost unmatched within the worlds of pop and hyperpop, and her willingness to interpolate these churning new metal-y guitars into songs all over this record pays off time and time again. And I just can't say enough about how much of an asset Clarence Clarity is to have as a producer, because he's just a wizard. These songs are catchy. These songs are dynamically, expertly composed in a way that I really, really love. And yeah, Rina is just up to the task to performing them. She is a commanding vocalist. She is intense and versatile, words I continue to find myself using in this video. And this record just fucking rules. Number 2, you know she had to be here. Had to be here. The girl, Rosalia Motomami. Jesus Christ, this album, oh my god. Remarkable. Following a series of acclaimed releases in the latter half of the 2010s, Rosalia found herself sneaking into much more commercial territory, making songs racking up hundreds of millions of streams with superstar artists. And that meant that the expectations going into Motomami were high for a variety of reasons. She has a following that exists at its core, anticipating critical excellency from this record, and she delivers it on a song like Hentai, on a song like Komonji, and yet she also has this new audience that just wants to hear some shit that fucking slaps. And you know what? This album fucking slaps. Lacombe Versace slaps. Sayoko slaps. And you know what? I'll say it. Tie me to the cross if you want to. Chicken Teriyaki slaps. This album is just both a pure delight, but also a display of such a remarkable talent, such a commanding vocalist, such an intoxicating musical presence. She is just so magnetic, commanding attention and desire anytime that her voice or even her presence appears on this record. And she does it with moments so stripped back, so vulnerable, back to back with some of the baddest shit I have ever fucking heard. Nobody else could do this. Nobody else could make this record. Nobody else could face the situation she did and nail it. And I mean nail it. She nailed it. This is kind of a once-in-a-decade type of release. I can't think of many records that my hopes were as high going into them as Motomami, and yet it still didn't disappoint. If anything, I was even more impressed than I anticipated, and that's remarkable. Remarkable really is the word. This album is remarkable, but it is just narrowly not my favorite pop record of the decade so far, and it's interesting to contrast these two. My favorite pop album of the decade so far doesn't arrive on the back of a lot of expectation. In fact, it was kind of an artist that I think myself and a lot of other people had written off following a series of records that never really seemed to live up to her true potential. And yet, out of nowhere, a throwback album of irresistible, dancey pop favorites lifted straight out of the 70s disco and 80s synth-pop scene and executed with the perfect touch of veteran, mature pop perfection from both a songwriting and a production standpoint, crafted the most irresistible pop album I have heard this decade. And if you somehow don't already know what I'm talking about, tap in. It's Jessie Ware with What's Your Pleasure? Yeah, what more can I say about this record? Full of infectious singles that have become dance floor staples, and the deep cuts so consistently good, they were just able to tap into a seemingly endless well of infectious instrumentation, querying from a history of dance and pop music intersecting brilliantly over the course of decades. In a sense, even though it doesn't parody this thematically, the album is kind of a love letter to dance pop as a sensation. And yet, thematically, what are we dealing with here? Portrayals of love, lust, and sex, and yet I continue to return to this word mature, and that was the theme of this record for me when I first heard it. Everything is handled with a subtlety, a nuance. The writing is mature. It is gentle, but it is also sexy. It is contemplative but sensual. Jessie Ware just spent all of this time honing her skills and returned in 2020 with a level of perfection that so few of her contemporaries could ever be capable of. It would take a world-class record for this to not be my favorite pop album of the entire 2020s. But you know what? Here's hoping that record comes. And that's it. Neighbors music aside, 15 great pop albums from this decade so far, 2 videos down already in this series we are moving through quickly, and next I think we're going to try and cover some kind of indie and folk stuff, which I'm looking forward to, and you should be too. So I'll see you then. Mwah.